I'll start. I'm Louis De La Rosa, lead organizer of iOSDevCamp, also director of engineering at Capital One.
Oh, hi. This is Korhan. I'm a senior manager at Capital One.
My name is Arthur. I'm one of the lead iOS developers at the Washington Post.
Hi, I'm Tanvi Nabar. I am an iOS developer working on the Yahoo Newsroom app.
I'm Janie Clayton. I am the Red Queen coder.
I'm Samuel Giddens. I'm a mobile developer experience engineer at Square.
Okay, cool. Thank you all again for speaking. And by the way, Eileen had to leave early today, and unfortunately Heidi couldn't make it. But thank you all for speaking and staying here for the panel. All right, first question. So we heard about the origin story of this conference in my keynote earlier today. How did you all get started in iOS development? And maybe we'll start from Samuel, kind of work our way back.
Sure. So a couple years ago, when I was finishing up high school, I was bored one Saturday afternoon, and I decided to make an app because I was a baseball umpire. I wanted to make an app that would let me replace my manual clicker to count balls and strikes. So I did that, and it was terrible. And it's no longer on the App Store, but the code's now up on GitHub if you want something to laugh at.
I'd originally gone to school for liberal arts stuff, and then the Great Recession hit, and I had to figure out something else to do with my life. And I decided to try to be practical and learn programming, and I was going to try to get into Java development, but I found a lot of trouble trying to get into entry-level Java positions because there were so many Java developers that they wouldn't hire you unless you had like 3 years of experience. And iOS was new, and they could barely find anybody that knew anything about iOS. And basically, if you knew Xcode, you knew how to set something up in a storyboard, they were more willing to take a chance on you. So I felt like it was an easier way to get into development when you didn't have any experience, was to get on the hot thing that nobody knew how to do yet.
When I was at school at NYU, I was interning at this startup, and I was taken on to support their iOS and Android apps. That's before Swift, before storyboards. So that was like a 1-year stint. And then I started working as a web developer there full-time. And then when I got my job at AOL, I worked as a web developer and then switched to Mac app development because that was the need at the time. And then I was transitioned into an iOS developer, and that's where I'm at right now. And being an Apple fangirl, I feel like this is where I want to be.
Cool.
I was in grad school for physics in a PhD program, and I was not really enjoying it, but on the side I was writing Firefox add-on extensions. And one day there was an agency out in New York, Fueled, that was looking for mobile developers in non-traditional places because they just couldn't hire them fast enough. So they looked at the Mozilla App Store or the Firefox add-on store. They found me, sent me a message. I thought they were kidding. They sent me a coding test. I passed by the skin of my teeth. And then I just moved out to New York and have been doing iOS development for 7 years now.
Nice. Back in 2009, is this working? I was working on a back-end team using C++, and I heard our front-end team was considering building mobile apps, but they didn't have anybody who knew iOS or Android. And they were thinking about contracting it out. I went and bought myself a MacBook Pro and spent my weekends and evenings building an Android and iOS prototype and demoed it to my manager, and he was convinced that I could do it. So they bought me a Mac Mini with 4 gigabytes memory. And I could run Xcode, but not the documentation. So I had my PC, Safari documentation, and Xcode in my Mac Mini. And since then, I've been in mobile.
Hopefully the machine you have now is a little bit more powerful than that.
Just a little bit.
Okay, awesome. All right. Next question, just thinking about, iOS has been around now for 10 years, the App Store, right? What's the app or project that you're most proud of in your iOS career? Maybe this time we'll start with Janie and then work our way around. Or you could pass too.
So back when I was first starting with iOS development, I went and worked for a startup where I was the oldest person there by like 10 years. So everybody there like was not old enough to drink, and like I didn't have a lot of programming experience, but like working with these guys, like I was pretty sure that they didn't really know what they were talking about and they didn't know what they were doing, and I was really kind of disappointed because I wanted to work on stuff and become a better programmer, and I didn't feel like I was getting better there. And I thought about like what would I want, like 5 years from now, where do I want to be and what do I want to be doing? And I thought like I want to be Brad Larson. And so like I decided to like reach out to him and tell him that I thought that the work that he did was really neat, and like he and I got to be friends, and he wound up hiring me and I worked for him for a year. And while I was working for him during that year, the big project that we had was he had a 12-year-old code base that was written in Objective-C that controlled robotics for printed electronics prototyping. And so the big project that we did was we ported that over to Swift. And so like for me, like I got pushed really hard on that project to figure out how to do things that nobody had done before, and to figure out a bunch of stuff where like I couldn't go to Brad and say, hey, what's the answer to this? Because he's like, I don't know, it hasn't been done before, you've got to figure it out. So like having a chance to actually work on a really large scale project that was scoped where we knew that there was going to be like a set finished point, and being able to take like this project that was 12 years old and it was only maintained by a single person, to get to talk to him about like, hey, why did you make this decision 10 years ago, and have him actually remember why he made that decision, and being able to like go in and work with this new rapidly changing technology and to create something that actually like interacted with the world, that was a physical thing that you could actually like look at and touch and interact with. That was just one of the highlights of my career.
Very cool, very cool. Tanvi, how about you?
So I've full-time been an iOS developer for, first Mac and then iOS for the past couple of years. So the app that I would say I did not contribute to as much as I would have wanted is Alto, which is this amazing mail application that it does not exist anymore because of certain changes, but it was one of the best feel-good mail applications that I helped contribute to, and it was flawless, according to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm biased.
Yeah. I too have had apps that I've worked on that I wish were still on the App Store, but can't control everything, unfortunately.
For me, I think it's the app I'm currently working on, the Arc mobile application. It is definitely the most complex beast of an app I have ever been a part of. And it really, everything else kind of pales into comparison for it that I've been able to touch. So it would be this crazy news application that we're working on.
Yeah, I'm a little biased. The current app that I'm working on is my favorite for a number of reasons. This is the largest project that I've worked on. Over the last 4 years, I saw it go from 15 people to 15 teams working on the same app, and over 100 people touch the code base. It's over 350 lines of code. There are dozens of frameworks, and we operate across geographies and different lines of businesses, and there are many product owners and designers, and just seeing such a large program move in such harmony and operating on a roadmap with so many different stakeholders and moving parts has been a very unique experience for me.
Mm-hmm. And what's the name of the app?
Capital One.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure.
I had to think long and hard about this. I think probably the Tumblr app, which I don't even use anymore. But I remember that I was working at Tumblr, and Apple released in beta like these resizable iOS simulators, and I was like, well, looks like iPhones might not always be 320 pixels wide anymore. And I refactored the app to work on variable width devices, and in the process I was there late one Friday, and I was playing around and sort of ended up accidentally redesigning the dashboard. And then the next Monday, the design lead comes in. I'm like, well, what do you think about this? And we ended up shipping, like turning the dashboard in from a card interface to a full width thing. And just being able to go in and like make a huge change like that, and not even do it intentionally, but get that shipped, is still something I feel pretty proud of.
Cool. All right, great. Great answers. For this next question, I kind of want to, have it a theme with the movie It's a Wonderful Life. I think everybody's probably seen it on TV. They play it like every Christmas time, where George Bailey, kind of sees what a life in his town would be without him. And let's imagine there was no iPhone, there was no iOS. What do you think your life would be like without iOS? So start with Tanvi.
Without iOS, firstly, I would have probably a crappy phone, but I would probably still be a web developer because I enjoyed doing that. I loved like the kind of flexibility you had with JavaScript and being able to immediately see your changes on the website. Like you make a change in the file, not having to wait for it to build. You just see it as soon as you refresh the page. Was something that I miss right now with iOS. So probably I would be a web developer.
Yeah, hot reload, you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Hot reload is something that you miss?
Like right now, like if I make a change, I have to wait for Xcode to build and like for it to be out on the device. But with the like front end, like on client side browser development, like you just modify the JavaScript file and you just refresh the page and you see your changes and you can edit those changes on the fly from the console to see how certain UI elements change based on certain changes you make on the fly. So that's something I miss.
I actually don't know what the answer is going to be to this. I thought about it for a couple days now. I have a feeling I probably would have ended up at some job I would not want. So after undergrad, I had a choice between grad school or working for the USPTO, the Patent Trademark Office, because I got a job there. And I decided to go to grad school, which was probably the better decision, even though I hated it. I think in an ideal world, I probably would have ended up working for Mozilla if iOS didn't exist, because I had just so many different Firefox extensions out there. I was very much entrenched in that environment. I just didn't realize you could make a career out of doing open source software development. So I think in an idealized world without iOS, I probably would have ended up on the West Coast working for Mozilla.
Without iOS, probably I'd be an Android developer. Without Android, I would probably be a game developer because that's how I started programming. And if that wasn't an option, I would have wanted to be a touring musician.
That sounds cool. Samuel?
Well, I probably would have gotten better grades in college. And, with that, it's possible I would have actually spent more time focusing on schoolwork, and I would probably be in an econ PhD program right now. So really, thank you, iOS.
So back during my first answer, when I was asked about what project I'm most proud of, I mentioned that I admired Brad Larson and I reached out to him and that he hired me. Well, at a certain point during my time working for him, I decided I'd rather have him as a boyfriend than have him as a boss. So we started dating several months ago and we're engaged and we're going to get married in a couple of months. Yeah, so, but I only knew him because of iOS, because he taught the iOS class at my college, because he had the GPU image framework, because he'd done all of this iOS stuff. And if he hadn't done all this iOS stuff, if iOS didn't exist, I never would have met him. So I think I'd still have gotten my divorce that I got from my ex-husband because he was not a nice person, but I think I probably would have wound up doing some kind of web development, probably Ruby. I'd be working for some like startup, and I don't think I'd be very happy right now. Because for me, like iOS was like it gave me kind of a purpose in my life that I hadn't had in a long time. And I think I probably would have been doing. I think I still would have been a developer, but I don't think I'd have been very happy or driven or like coding on weekends and being excited about doing new stuff. I think I just like put in my 40 hours and go get drunk and then like pass out.
Yeah, I mean, iOS is pretty exciting. But by the way, I really like how you refer to Brad as the boyfriend, and now he's turned into the fiance.
Yes.
That's kind of fun. Let's see. What do you, actually, let me jump around a little bit in the questions that I sent out. Are you excited about Marzipan, aka UIKit on Mac? And maybe start with Arthur.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually just mentioning this to Sam in the back. So I hate web development, just because it's just ever changing and not fun to work in with a bunch of those languages, and there's just way too many frameworks. And the idea, so when I was watching WWDC, they were demoing the Apple News iPad app on a Mac, right? And I was thinking, oh, cool, you can now just read the Washington Post, which was one of the apps that they demoed, on a native Mac app, and I'm like, that's cool. I wonder if you can do that with a bunch of other websites that I visit, so I'd never have to actually open up a browser again. And then I'm really hoping that becomes the case, and I'm really hoping this is some part of some master plan to kind of kill off the web. the front end layer.
Firefox.
Oh no, that was a different life.
Okay, that's the alternate.
Yeah, that to me is the ultimate goal, I guess. Yeah.
Korhan?
Yeah, I think there are apps where it makes sense, the ones they demoed, definitely. And I think there are a lot of use cases where web makes sense to me. Like I'm completely happy with Capital One's website, for example. I don't know if I would prefer using the iOS app on Mac. I'm excited about it because it will definitely free up a lot of smart developers who don't have to port their work. And it'll definitely create a lot of better user experiences. At the same time, it's going to be one more thing to talk about. Maybe next year, if we'll follow up on cross-platform.
Yeah, it'll be kind of confusing if it's like Mac, iOS, DevCampDC. But we'll think of a good name. Samuel?
I'm excited to see that native development isn't dead. I really do think that stuff that's native to a particular platform looks better and it feels better and is more fun and delightful to use. And I'm happy to see that, okay, here's this new-ish native development framework that will mean that more people are going to be able to develop native Mac apps, and maybe that's going to mean, fewer non-native web apps that I have to use on a daily basis.
I don't really know what to think one way or another because, like, as a developer, like, I find it interesting to think, like, oh, cool, I could, like, build the app once and have it work on 2 platforms. But as a contractor who's worked for various companies that are kind of resentful about the fact that they even have to have, like, a native iOS app at all, like, I can imagine them coming up to them and going, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could have this as a Mac app? And they'd be like, nobody uses the Mac. Like, that's really stupid. We don't want to focus our attention on that. So, like, I am curious about how that would deal with things that are cross-platform because, like, you have, like, different, like, I'm just curious to see how it's going to plan out because there's the considerations of what, like, we want as the developer community, but then there's also the business considerations of, like, the people that tend to hire us and pay us to do things. So, I don't know.
As someone who started working on Apple development on OS X 2 years ago, I know it was a problem that we faced to get a lot of support out there for AppKit problems. And UIKit support will definitely help solving that, and it will make development for Mac much faster. But as someone who hates looking at iOS apps on an iPad because they just don't scale to use all the real estate, I just hope that the Mac apps that are developed take into account that this is another platform that you need to design for and not just rely on an iOS app somehow looking all right on a Mac.
Okay. Here's an interesting question, especially for those, in the audience or might be watching this later, who are thinking about, speaking and they're not sure, how do you get started? How did you all get started in speaking and presenting on a stage like this? Korhan?
I did not think about it at the time, but in middle school and high school, I was in Model United Nations. So we'd pretend like we're United Nations delegates for, random countries. And once a year, we'd go to the Netherlands, The Hague, and there'd be this assembly. And you'd
That's
get
cool.
to work on like real political issues. Should sanctions on such and such country be lifted? And you'd try to get people to sign your petition, and then if it got enough, more than like 150 signatures, you'd get to present it in front of like 1,500 people. So I used to do that, but in terms of like technical speaking, and I did some associate assistantship when I was in grad school. I taught a couple of courses. That was sort of my maybe first experience in doing technical presentations, and I realized it takes a lot of time for, every hour it takes maybe, 10 hours of preparation. And here at Capital One, there's a very strong culture of sponsoring conferences, hosting conferences internally, and there are a lot of smart and interesting people, accomplished people who give a lot of talks. So being around people like that and around such organizations, that sort of inspired me to do it. And I think I got my first talk at iOSDevCamp like 3 years ago, and then CocoConf,
Nice.
Swift Summit, and I think sort of took off after.
Okay, awesome. Samuel?
So I gave my first ever conference talk the afternoon of my last day working at Tumblr, and it was awful. At one point, like I was so nervous, I accidentally swore on stage, and then the organizer was just like looking at me, shaking his head, being like, "No, don't do that." And I felt so bad about that for the next 2 hours as I was wiping my work laptop. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to do more of it. I don't know what that says about me.
So I got into conference speaking because people advocated for me. I'd gone to a couple of conferences, and it was like this mind-blowing experience of getting to go and talk to people who actually did this for a living, as opposed to just talking to my classmates at my community college. And one of the speakers came up to me and said, "Well, you come to a lot of these conferences. When are you going to start speaking at them?" And I just was like, "Oh, yeah, I can't speak at a conference. I'm a student. I don't know anything. I'm an idiot. Nobody wants to hear anything I have to say." He's like, "No, that's totally wrong. Here." He brought me over to the organizer and said, "Hey, Dave, this is Janie. Janie'd like to get into conference speaking. Can you invite her to come speak at your next conference?" And he's like, "Sure. We're having a conference in Chicago in a couple of months. Send me your talk, and you'll go and you'll speak at this conference." And that one moment, when I was a student, having somebody come up and tell me that something that I had to contribute was valuable, and getting me an opportunity to go up and speak, that completely changed the way that I thought about myself. I stopped thinking of myself as being this, dumbass student that didn't know anything. And I started thinking of myself as a professional developer. And it's so important for you to advocate for people that don't necessarily think that they have anything to contribute, because one person stepping in and telling you that your thoughts and stuff are valuable, it can make a huge amount of difference in somebody's life.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, believe it or not, today was my first presentation outside of my company, and I would like to thank Jason Howland for that, because he presented last year and he thought it was a great experience. So I gave a talk about the notification extensions at work, because we wanted more teams to be aware of it. And he pinged me later and said, "Hey, I spoke here last year. Would you want to apply to speak this year?" And which is what I did. And thanks for having me, because that helped me get over this big hurdle of public speaking. And I would look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Did forget to turn off my mic when I went to the green room, so.
It's okay. And thanks to Jason for encouraging her.
When I was an undergrad, I was the head of the Society of Physics Students, or sorry, the vice head. So I was in charge of tutoring. That's what the vice head did. And I really enjoyed the act of like explaining a concept to a student because that meant I understood it. And I had a lot of qualms around how well I did or didn't understand physics at the time. So by being in a scenario where I could speak about it and someone else got it, it made me feel better about understanding it. And then in grad school, one of the things you had to do as a graduate student is you had to travel around speaking about what it is you're doing at all these physics conferences. And it was really cool to be able to go to like the American Physical Society in front of everyone and just speak about whatever it is that you were doing at the time. And listening to all these talks was really inspiring. And then when I switched careers into this current field, I kind of realized that if I want to meet people or if I want to travel anywhere, honestly, or just advance myself, finding things to talk about would be a good way of doing that. And I think in general, it's made me a bit more confident as a person. So I feel like if you ever have the inkling of doing it, you should definitely try. I mean, the worst you could do is curse on stage, I guess. I mean, and that's not even, yeah. And everyone wants you to succeed, right? None of you here are looking at us and be like, I hope that person just screws up and falls on their face.
Cool. And I know Janie has to leave soon to catch her flight, but let me just ask one last question, and we'll start with Janie, and then you feel free to go. What one tool or framework or open source project would you recommend that people just look into, after they go home today?
GPU image 3.
That was a gimme, yeah.
Yeah.
I set you up. Cool. All right. Thank you, Janie. Have a great flight. Abby?
I'm blacking out.
Okay, you can pass.
Okay, I'll come back.
Okay.
It's a small utility that I've been using for a couple of years called Spectacles. It's a Windows resizer, so you just kind of push a couple buttons and it'll make things 1/3 or 1/2 of the screen. And I use a bunch of screens at work, so it's kind of useful if I want to have like 7 open windows all visible at the same time. So not open. I don't know if it's open source, but I honestly can't live without it. So whenever I go on another computer and I try resizing and it doesn't work, it really frustrates me.
But by the way, I'm curious now. Like, how big is your monitor? Do you
I have
like
3
11, 12?
27-inch monitors.
Oh, okay, nice. Korhan?
Yeah, I use a tool called Moom. I've learned it from Jose, and it helps you resize your windows in such a way that you take most advantage of any screen size, and that made me slightly more productive.
Cool. Samuel?
So there's this tool called CocoaPods. No, I'm kidding. Well, just in terms of looking into something, I'd say take a look at the Swift standard library. If you wanna get a look into, like, in my mind, if you want to understand how something really works, look at the absolute worst code written in it, the most complicated, the hardest to understand. And in any language, that's going to be the standard library. So if you really want to know where a language falls down, and like what weird corners had to be added into it just to make really simple stuff work, look at the standard library. And since the Swift standard library is written in something that looks like normal Swift, it's easy enough to look into.
So, like, I couldn't think of any, like, Swift or Objective-C frameworks that I recently used that I would want to promote, because most of the stuff, I think it's internal that we use. So, as a web developer, I've used a few frameworks that would apply to you as an iOS developer as well. Like, for example, if you want to use any mock data and you use a lot of JSON objects, then there are a couple of browser extensions that you can add, which lets you format all of the JSON responses that you get from web servers to make them look more like collapsible objects. So if you're loading something on Chrome and you want to look at how objects are structured, and rather than get like this blob that's spit out on your browser, you can use that extension. I think it's called JSON-lint, if I'm not wrong, but I need to double check what it's called. It's super useful.
Cool. Well, I changed my mind. Let's just do one last one just to end it on a fun note. What's one series that you've seen that you binge watched that you really enjoyed? I'll go first. Cobra Kai. It's basically like Karate Kid 2 on YouTube Red. Samuel?
The first time I watched The West Wing on Netflix, it kept on popping up saying, "Are you still watching? Are you still watching? Are you still watching?" And yeah, I got through like 4 of those, and turns out you can fit 4 of those. I can't believe you're still watching Netflix into a season. So.
One of the series that I really enjoyed watching and which had 8 seasons was House MD, because it was just fascinating to see this character who's normally, he just seems more polite as a British actor like Hugh Laurie, and like seeing him on screen like as this really inappropriate doctor, brilliant doctor, and then when I was done, I watched that series in like a month, I think, like 8 seasons, so I pretty much did nothing else. But once I was done, I was like, what do I do with my life now?
I think a lot of us feel like that after a series.
Golden Girls.
Thank you for being a friend.
My wife and I got into a phase where we watched a lot of like Seinfeld and Friends, and somehow we ended up on Golden Girls, and that's actually an amazing show. But that's not the one I wanted. I think Black Mirror would be it. When I first discovered it, I watched first 3 seasons are out, and I watched all of them in a weekend. Thankfully, there's only like 4 or 5 episodes. But right now, I just started with Altered Carbon on Netflix, and that show is amazing. Did I take yours?
Yeah, I was just going to now that you asked that question, I remembered I should watch Altered Carbon again. So I'm going to go to my hotel, download the whole season, and watch it this weekend again.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all panelists for answering my crazy questions. And let's give them a round of applause.